Will you please stand for the gospel glory? I am reading this morning. This is such a familiar passage. In fact, all of these passages this morning are so familiar. But I'm reading this from the Cotton Patch Gospel of Clarence Jordan's translation. He writes it in the vernacular, and it makes you hear the story a whole different way. Do you know it? You're welcome. They sailed over to Gerasa County, Alabama, which is across the lake from Georgia. When he got out on land, he was met by a city man who had a demon. For a long time, he had worn no clothing and wouldn't stay in a house but in a cemetery. When he saw Jesus, he stood in front of him and yelled and shouted at the top of his lungs, "What you got against me, Jesus, you God's holy boy? I warn you, don't you put the screws on me." For Jesus was telling the mean spirit to come out of the man because it frequently convulsed him, and he had to be placed under guard, shackled and handcuffed. But he broke loose and was driven by the demon back into the woods. So Jesus asked him, "What's your name?" He said, "Multitude," since a whole slew of demons had entered him. Then they started begging him not to order them into exile. Now there was a hillside with a large herd of pet hogs, and they were being fed. So the demons begged him to let them go into them. He permitted them, and the demons rushed out of the man and into the hogs. When they did, the whole herd went tearing down the slope and into the lake and were drowned. When the herdsmen saw what had happened, they ran like mad and told it to both farmers and city people. Everybody flocked out to gawk, and they came to Jesus and found the man whom the demons had departed, sitting at Jesus' feet, fully clothed and completely sane. It just scared the daylights out of them, especially when the herdsman kept telling them how the demon man had been cured. So all the people in that part of Alabama asked him to go away and let them alone because they were so scared. They were shaken all over. When he got into the boat to leave, the man from whom the demons had departed asked him to go with him. But he turned him down and said, "Go back home and tell them about all that God has done for you." So he went through the whole city, speaking on what Jesus had done for him. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I hope I didn't really speak it. I hope I didn't destroy your southern accent too bad. That takes a drink of water. Debbie Kelsey, you know, is from that part of Georgia, right over the line from Alabama, and she gave me permission to do that. So, well, it's so good to be here with you. Thank you for asking me. Growing up in the Lutheran Church back in the 1940s and 50s, it was the custom then to read the same scriptures every year. But the one year the pastor was supposed to preach on the Old Testament lesson, the next year on the epistle lesson, and the third year on the gospel lesson. So you got a 3-year cycle, so to speak, but it was always on those same scriptures every year. But then, as you know, and as we practice here at UBC, the National Council of Churches came up with the idea of a 3-year cycle of scripture readings, and each one had an Old Testament lesson, a psalm, an epistle, and a New Testament lesson. And on this 3-year cycle, we pretty much get through all the important stuff in the Bible. The last time these scriptures came up, I was here as your interim pastor, and I preached on this particular passages for that year. I said, and I chose then to focus on the demons that were afflicting this man who had to live in the cemetery because he was so violent. And I said then that although we think that demons are passé in this day and age, they really are very much with us still. Physical, emotional, psychological, monetary, relational demons assault us today just as they did this man back in the gospel lesson. Today, though, I would like to focus on the theme of silence that seems to run through all of the lessons of the day. Silence is the absence of sound, which can imply the absence of activity, which in turn can imply a solitariness or an aloneness, away from everyone and everything. Silence is practically impossible to achieve today. Music, TV, radio, cars, sirens, dogs barking, talking, cell phones, iPods, conference calls, Skype, baboozelas, neighbors playing the music while you're trying to be quiet and write your sermon. George Herbert wrote, "By all means, take some time to be alone, and see what thy soul doth wear." By all means, take some time to be alone, and see what thy soul doth wear.